Hello, friends, and welcome back to another episode of DIY Sugar Baby Podcast. I'm your host, Rosie Quartz, and I've got my little Mothman mug here. Getting ready to do an interview with one of my favorite kinktok mutuals, Primal Empress. This platform is all about glitter, and peer-reviewed scientific research is for the witches, the pagans, cosplayers, accountants, gamers, D&D enthusiasts, psychology fans, shadow workers, and of course those who are also in a process of deconstructing their faith. So I myself am a spicy content creator, not just a Twitch streamer, not just a Discord community admin, so much more. But the whole point of this podcast is to talk about consent and to affirm the educated and informed adult decisions that you make for your own well-being. So whether you are yourself a spicy content creator, you're deconstructing your faith, whatever else it may be, this podcast really is to affirm and validate those life decisions as we kind of live in a world in which that tends to get gaslit out of us and taken away. And this is to actually affirm that no, there are ethical boundaries in place, and when it comes to your well-being, you are the expert in your experience. So last month, myself and Primal Empress had a marvelous little bit of a Discord call with each other to talk about the things that we are most passionate about. Psychology is the thing that makes our brains go brrrr, and we got very excited to share a little bit more of what we were talking about in that conversation. Both of us like to interact online in those types of discussions, and just basically taking some of what we talk about on TikTok, which is only about like a 3-minute amount of time to talk about stuff at most, and really actually dive into the nitty-gritty of this subject matter. So without further ado, we are going to jump into the podcast interview with Primal Empress. The audio will also be available on Spotify for those who are watching on YouTube and want to check back in later, or maybe listen while they're driving, that sort of thing. So thank you so much for tuning in to the DIY Sugar Baby podcast. We are here just to affirm and to validate and to talk about some really important subject matter. So let's get into kink and psychology with Primal Empress.
Sugar and spice, lingerie and psychobabble, everything nice. Kitty girls and accounting troubles, DIY, sugar baby.
All right, welcome to the DIY Sugar Baby podcast, Primal Empress. I'm so excited to have you here. Why don't you introduce yourself with a little bit of like your background, your education, that sort of thing?
Okay, well, thank you for having me here. So I qualified as a psychologist. I have a master's degree in applied psychology, where I specialized in child development and also addiction. I am also a qualified nanny and child carer. So I now work, I've used to work in the NHS, which is the National Health Service in the UK, but I now work privately as a parenting coach. So think Super Nanny.
Yes, I used to love that show. I think that was something like we really bonded over when we found each other's content. It was like, oh, psychology, kink, and nanny work and childcare and stuff like that. It was just like a very specific intersect.
Yes.
Stuff. Yeah.
But it all goes very well together, I find.
It does. Like you wouldn't necessarily think that. I know a lot of people have like a lot of walls between like, if you're an adult, like, why do you know anything about working with kids and stuff like that? And it's like, well, that's what the human brain's like. You follow that process upward from childhood onward, and you can see the whole development throughout the lifetime.
Yeah, I think working with children really makes you much more aware of yourself and why you do things, because you see children just learning and growing and, you know, becoming humans. Well, they're already humans, but becoming more grown-up humans.
Yeah, you watch the neurological frameworks start to build over time, and you go, oh, well, that explains a lot about how I got to where I am and why I react to things the way that I do.
Definitely.
Yeah, for sure. So where did that actually start to intersect with kink for you, because this is kind of like the overall topic that we're going with for this podcast episode, is we're talking about psychology and kink. So how did you get like this beautiful, wonderful background here? And then now you're over on TikTok. This is how we found each other, actually, through kinktok.
Through kinktok. So I have been interested in kink. I mean, if you really sit and think about it, probably since I was much younger than I should admit. But it was when I was 18 and I watched the movie Secretary.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and because I didn't know what it was that I needed. I wasn't like my friends. I wasn't interested in boys or girls or doing any of the stuff that they were doing. But when I saw that film, I was like, and then I had a word, like BDSM, kink.
Right.
So then I could research it. So I did, and then I got into my first sort of like relationship dynamic when I was 23. And then I've been sort of part of the scene ever since. And then TikTok, I was on my own in lockdown, bored, needing a distraction, found TikTok, and the algorithm, as it does, very quickly helped me find my people. And for a while, I was just watching people like you and other people. And then I felt like I had something that I could contribute to the conversation. So I created the Primal Empress account, and she took off really quickly.
Oh, yes. Yeah, for sure. Because I just remembered seeing your content like come out of nowhere. Out of nowhere, right? And I was absolutely captivated. I was like, yes, somebody is bringing the real deal psychology content into kink. And I was just like, friend, please. Hi.
Well, never really, like, there were a few times during my master's degree where I touched on like kink within psychology, particularly in the sort of addiction. This is like when I was studying addiction, it came up, but I'd never really, I suppose I'm a natural psychologist. I'm always, once you've got those tools, you just apply it all the time. You can't
stop. No,
you can't stop. You're always applying it. And that's when I started to see, and also myself with the parasocial relationships, like I was starting to, being alone in lockdown and watching, there was a particular creator that I was watching, and I was watching his content, and I was like, wow, for a minute, literally a minute, I felt like he was my dom. And then I'm like, what is this? It's not okay. And then there was some debate going on, and I was like, right, okay, I need to say some stuff. So I did.
Yeah, actually, I think I really saw your content with a very specific debate in regards to doms. Be aware of the headspace that you might be putting people into when you make POV content. And I remember that sparked such a big debate. And honestly, like, people now actually will tag Primal Empress in my content. Like, they'll just be like, you become such a respected figure in the online kink community at this point. People definitely have a tendency to just be like, yeah, Primal Empress has a pretty good understanding of the psychological background to be aware of with all this.
Yeah, I get tagged a lot, and it's really funny when it's somebody tagging me in the content that belongs to one of my friends, and I'm like, they're fine, it's fine. They know what they're doing.
Yeah, that was always like, I used to have that happen with like the witchy content before, because I think like you and I have also talked about this as well, where with social media, aside from the parasocial relationships, the dialogues themselves can be exhausting. It's one of the reasons why we're doing it in a podcast version this time around, just because with social media, you get that telephone effect happening, and it can be a lot.
Chinese whispers. I call it Chinese whispers. I've seen it particularly recently. One person will make a statement, or I like to ask questions. I really like that way of making people think by asking questions, but someone will come out with something that's a really valid point, but people only hear what they want to hear, or they pick up on the semantics, and you get between 1 and 3 minutes maximum to make a video. So you don't have the time to explain all the nuances unless you're going to do lots and lots of parts, and people don't really want lots of parts. So,
it kind of just devolves as it goes down, and especially if you've triggered somebody's like ego defenses or something and they're not really hearing what you're saying. can
Yes,
be.
absolutely. People get triggered. People try to defend themselves. People try to justify things, and actually, it's very rarely is it ever a personal attack. I think the only time people really bring anything personal into it is when people are making those dangerous videos with like bad ropes and belts and
Oh
ties and
yes,
things.
that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah, we
there's a lot of
see.
those.
Yeah, we see that a lot. I think thanks to at Wild Heathen is their
Yeah,
account. Anytime we see the belts being used as handcuffs now, we're just like, belts are for smacky
smacky
snacks,
smack.
not
Yep.
strappy straps.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. He needs to get that put on a t-shirt.
he really does. He really does. Wild Heathen was another content creator within kinktok who they really took off. I think they're at like 400 K at this point, and I think we've got a couple, especially like the male presenting doms, who will end up with a ton of parasocial relationships to deal with because they make POV content.
Yeah, and a lot of the time they it's such a hard balance as well, because some of them entertain that because they want to transfer them to other platforms. And it's like, I get that, and I'm all for business, but also ethical. Like, remember your ethics. These are people's feelings and thoughts and everything else.
Yes, exactly. I mean, as a spicy content creator myself, making caregiver dom content, I became very intense in my, like, as soon as you land in my spicy sites, you're going to get a welcome that says, by the way, here are my hard limits. I do not allow travel from, like, I will not travel to you. You're not traveling to me. This is not a relationship. You are purchasing content from me. Just always keeping that in mind, that this is 100% business related. There is genuine care. We're humans interacting and negotiating with each other as humans. This is not objectification, but at the same time, please remember this is not a real relationship as well.
Yeah, and I think it's good to state that, but some people will read it without reading it. They're not necessarily going to take it in. Yeah, and I've tried to explain this to people. If you're on your own and you have a particular content creator that you like, and they've been on TikTok for a while, there's going to be a good few hours worth of content there. And if they just scroll, it's a one-on-one, relationship to that person who's doing the scrolling. And whether you like it or not, even though you recorded, sat in your living room or your garden or whatever, you're in their bedroom, you're in their living room, you're in their environment. And it's almost like brainwashing. It's really interesting. I find it really fascinating. And then if you're then transferring them to another site where they're paying for you to call them princess or baby doll or whatever, and then getting intimate, that's another huge
it's another layer. Yes.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's
yeah,
really
actually it is. It's actually why I've also added to my disclaimers other levels of, like, remember acceptable levels of risk for yourself, things like that, where you need to remember that if you are in a vulnerable place emotionally and all that, and you're engaging with this type of content, and this is going to relate to some conversation down the road here with this podcast episode, is actually looking at reinforcement. We're going to be looking at what impact long-term consistent interaction with this type of content or 24/7 dynamics can have on your brain, on other relationships, that sort of thing, which is going to be pretty cool to dive into. And I know for myself, like, every once in a while I'll get somebody who will show up in my DMs having conversations with me as though I know who they are. And they won't remember that I've never seen their content. I don't know who they are, but they'll talk to me as if we know each other. And it is disorienting.
Well, they know us. This is the thing. They know what we've allowed them to see, but they think that they know all of it. And also, particularly with, like, me, for example, I do a lot of lives, so it is quite interactive, so they do get to know me quite well. But they're in my home, they've seen my space. Like, some of my friends, because of lockdown, haven't even been in my home, so they will know just little things about my house that other people might not know. And although we're controlling what we put out, we're only letting them see what we want them to see. they do think that they know. I've done it myself where I think I know someone and then I'm like, whoa, no, I don't know you.
Yeah, exactly. Like a lot of people, if this is what it looks like every time I'm live, I'm streaming, everyone knows the shark is back here at this point, right? So it is a little bit of, it's not that hard for our brain to see you through your screen and get a good general idea of what your environment is.
Yeah, it's like actors who play a recurring role, like soaps or long-time dramas and things. It's an actor playing a role, but if you're seeing them every day, if you see them on the street, so many people think that they are the character and not the person. So parasocial relationships are nothing new, but the TikTok world is very interesting.
It is. Actually, thinking back, I remember last year having this sense of, because I had so many witch talk mutuals I was interacting with daily. And so I would get up in the morning, I'd be eating breakfast and participating almost in the lives of all my friends and mutuals who I had through TikTok, because I would see their morning rituals. I would see them going about their day. They talk about frustrations with family. Like, it was almost as if, like with TikTok feels very unique to other social media.
Yeah,
because it's so much content of people's lives, whereas Facebook, you get like a post here and there. Twitter, you get like a blurb of written word, but TikTok, you are seeing people's lives on a daily basis.
Yeah. And I think, and like with Instagram, where Instagram's trying with the Reels thing, but I don't think it's going to ever be taken in the same way that TikTok has, because it's almost like an add-on. Instagram is very, a lovely posed photograph, and people's stories, they can give, a little glimpse of their life, but TikTok, it's just constant content, and you see people thrive as well. They'll start and they're always made up, and then soon enough they start to let that shield down a little bit, and they'll make content where their hair and makeup isn't perfect. They'll be vulnerable because most of the followers are really supportive and they really make you feel safe to be vulnerable. So yeah, it's a completely different, people who are not on TikTok do not understand it.
I don't think so. No. Not really. And I mean, even just from the outside, when family or friends or whatnot finds your TikTok content, they can also be like, were you masking? Or things like, for some reason, it's easy. I've found like there's parts of myself that I can easily portray through a screen into a TikTok vid, but you won't see me be that person necessarily in person with somebody. And so when my extended family found my TikTok content, they were like, is this you? Like, they were actually, like, they kept asking, is this actually you? And I was like, yeah, that's yeah, that definitely is. So it's a process. But going into the next part of this, because I'm actually thinking, like, following with the conversation, instead of going directly into one part of the conversation I'm really interested in doing, I want to actually talk about 24/7 kink dynamics. So for the audience or people listening in who might not know, a 24/7 dynamic is that power exchange 24/7. You're not getting out of this. This is your life now. And of course, you can always safe word out. If you're in a good one, at least, like, you're going to be able to safe word out. You're going to be able to end it at any point. But what we actually were interested in talking about is the impact on your brain, on your other relationships in your life, even executive functioning, if you are in a 24/7 power dynamic. So I remember from our last conversation we had, you were talking about your own experience with a 24/7.
Yeah, in my opinion now, I was probably too young and too inexperienced. And there were lots of red flags within that dynamic, and I was probably 50% of them, to be honest. But yeah, I was in a 24/7 TPA for quite a while, and as as toxic as it ended up, there was a lot that helped me thrive. I have terrible executive functioning. I think if I were to be tested, I'd score quite highly as neurodivergent, and having someone able to give me that structure was fantastic, because I'm terrible at structure. So there were lots of things about it that really, really helped, but I ended up losing my autonomy in that role, and I became the role. And when that ended, it took me a really long time to find who I was again. And it wasn't necessarily the other person's fault. I think when you start to lose who you are, it's like a different type of subspace. It's like a psychological subspace where you just get very lost. And I wouldn't have been able to get out of it even if I'd wanted to.
Right. Because, well, when we talk about kink, for anybody who might not know while listening, when you go into what's called a headspace, within that scene, that exchange, usually what happens is that you are beforehand, it's almost like a ritual, a spiritual ritual, where you prepare for your ritual, and then you have your entry, your intro, whatever it is that starts your ritual. You are then in the headspace of the ritual, and then you come out, you clean up, aftercare, etc. And so I think what really makes 24/7 curious is that with other scenes, like let's say you're doing an impact play scene, you go into the headspace and then you come out again. Whereas with 24/7, because this is, I personally only have experience with the scenes, but I don't do 24/7 myself, because I would honestly get so irritated.
Yeah.
I got so much to do in my life, where I'm also like working as a dom myself now. So 24/7 headspace, I feel, would be difficult to manage with the life I do. But what I hear from you describing is that it's a different headspace. It's not the same as the play.
Yeah, the play is separate. And so I've had a few dynamics now. One which was a long time of 24/7, and then I've had not 24/7, but we sort of maintained those roles, but maintained our autonomy outside of that, and then we would, play. And then I've just had scenes without any DS dynamic. And I think the second one's the one that works for me, the bit of both, but maintaining the autonomy. But yeah, so if you're not in a 24/7 dynamic and you're going into a scene, you sort of get into the headspace of the role of top, bottom, sub, dom. You do the scene and then you come out of it. With the 24/7, you're always in that role of, I mean, for me, I was the sub. So I was always, submitting. I'm a caregiver. I have a worship kink. So it was, I wouldn't say master slave, because that's a different type of dynamic, but it was certainly bordering on it, where I felt like I couldn't make any day-to-day choices. Like I felt like I always had to ask permission to do anything. And it was a little bit of brainwashing, I think, in a way, but also the pressure on that other person became too much, because then I became completely reliant on them for everything. And eventually I wasn't the person that he first met, and it ended in tears, to be honest.
Yeah. Okay. So there's been like a couple areas for myself, especially when I was really researching kink at the beginning and all of that. I came across this one article by a submissive, and she went into the finances. She is now in a 24/7 kink dynamic. And there was one segment where she goes, at first I was really hesitant to hand over all my finances to him, but I was so lucky that he was so patient with me, and he explained everything to me about why it was necessary for full submission, for him to have control over everything. And I remember reading that and being like, oh shit. Oh no. I don't think you're okay. And I think you also brought up a good point there for the Dom, because you were talking about this earlier today. While I was doing my makeup, I was also catching up on Primal Empress's content, and one of like the most recent videos was talking about how Doms are people too. And so if you've got somebody who's completely reliant on you, I mean, like for myself, I could never be a 24/7 Dom because I do not have the energy to caregive for somebody 24/7. And I think that's something we see with toxic subs a lot through TikTok, because
Yes.
there's a plethora where it's almost like this desire to have somebody caregive them, to step in, to just take over everything. Whereas I think there are benefits to having somebody who is helping with executive functioning, who's doing that positive affirmation, who's doing or negative reinforcement, as well as like the agreed upon punishments and whatnot, just that are helping you function. But at the same time, is there a level where it goes, like realistically for the human brain, where it goes too far? Or is there like a difference between a 24/7 dynamic that is building you up, but you still have autonomy enough that you keep your sense of identity? Or is the whole like loss of identity, they have full control? Is there a line?
Yeah, so I genuinely think that this line only really happens with experience. I think the biggest problem with my relationship was that I was new. I was so eager to please that I wasn't always honest about limits, and because I just wanted to please them.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Got that a little bit of fawn going on there.
yeah. Oh my God. Well, the worship kink doesn't help. So I think now being older, having bad experiences, really, because it's one thing with researching, like you should absolutely do your research all of the time. But I think sometimes until it's like driving a car, you know, when you're learning to drive a car, but you haven't ever been in a car, you don't really understand until you've been in the car and you've driven it and then a few times and you get used to it. It's very similar to that, I would say. Like you can research everything there is about kink and BDSM and everything else, but until you've actually experienced it, you don't know what some of your limits are. I got really depressed in that relationship because I've always been really strong, really confident. I've always been quite intellectual. I've always had really professional jobs, and it just got to the point where I couldn't make any decisions, or I started lying as well, just to escape. Instead of being honest and sort of saying, I need out of this for a few minutes, I would tip milk down the sink just to go to the shop and buy more milk, you know, because I just needed that space, that physical and emotional headspace. And you know, he started lying as well, and wasn't attracted to me anymore either, because that sort of bright, bubbly person that I was in the beginning lost who she was, and then it became really toxic. And the depression for both of us, because we both really cared about each other, but we just didn't do it right, to be honest. And I think once those cracks are there, like we tried going back a few times. We were breaking up and getting back together, but no, like even now with that person, I feel myself getting anxious and depressed, and because I'll say something and he'll automatically go to correct me because we're still friends, but it's like I want to throw something at his head.
No.
Yeah. So the depression definitely, because I was just I could not think for myself. It wasn't even about the executive functioning anymore. It was I couldn't do anything for myself anymore. I lost who I was. I lost my personality in the role. I became subservient, submissive. I became a submissive instead of me being a submissive in a relationship.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and then at some point you had to come to the realization that wasn't healthy for you in that kind of capacity.
Yeah.
And you know, I really like that take. Like both of us are really into like psychology and ethics and stuff like that. And the temptation really becomes like when you look at something like 24/7 dynamics and becoming a submissive and being like, well, what if over time your dom, like like, let's say you're in a 24/7 master slave dynamic and your dom is gone for a while, leaves for several months for a business, whatever. Or like, what happens if your dom loses a family member and they're now in a grief process and they don't have the spoons to be your dom, but now you're in this headspace for so long where, like what you describe happens, where you can't actually make decisions and stuff. So you've kind of got to look at the mental health things that might happen if your dom can't be your dom when you're in 24/7.
Yeah, I think anyone doing 24/7 needs to have had some experience of dynamics beforehand and have very clear boundaries of, you know, and for, I mean, some people want to be told what to eat and what, you know, not to eat, you know, to the point where you go to a restaurant with a friend and you check in with your dom and tell them what's on the menu and they tell you what you can have. Like, some
Right.
people like that element of control. Like, for me, that's a limit. And yeah, I mean, I definitely think just experience and knowing your limits, and that comes from, I think, having other dynamic experiences before you can throw yourself in. But definitely what you said about if that person is gone for a while and you don't know what to do, or something real happens. That was the beginning of the end for our relationship. Something really big happened within our dynamic where he just was not able to function and I came back into my own.
Right.
And all of a sudden it was like, I don't want to do this anymore because I've remembered who I am and I can totally handle this by myself. So
yeah, I think that's actually, this links into a bigger picture for recognizing that doms are people as well who have limits, who have who may not have the capacity to actually be that dom person 24/7, and also kind of asking for the dom, is it actually an indicator of like insecure attachments or mental health problems to be in that role 24/7 and not be able to step back and let them be a person or what not? Because I think what we see in media especially portrays doms as being very insecure, avoidant attachments, almost like they have to keep the submissive, they like being in that headspace and they have to keep the submissive at arm's length. They have to be in control at all times. And the question becomes, is that healthy either?
So this is what I hate about kink in the media, is they always portray it in a way that I don't understand. Or certainly in a way that I haven't experienced. It's all very, you know, doms keeping their subs at arm's length. I've never had that happen. Even in dynamics where it's very much like, this is just a casual thing, no feelings are going to get involved, we're just it every single time.
Right.
It's so intense. It's a really intense relationship because the level of communication that you need in these dynamics is it goes above and beyond what most vanilla relationships have. I think the other thing that happens is that doms get labeled as abusive, whereas a sub doesn't. And
right.
Although there were certainly very big toxic traits from that dom in the end, my family think that he was abusive, and there were elements, but they don't see the other side. They don't see just how codependent I was, just how clingy I was, just how, quite frankly, pathetic I was at times, and how frustrating that was for him because I got completely lost. But I'm never going to get called abusive, but the doms do, and
right.
That's unfair.
Because like I've seen a number of dynamics, especially in like caregiver doms has sort of become a new thing. A lot of the times when I talk about like, yeah, I'm a caregiver one, people are like, that's a thing. Or I'll do like caregiver POVs and people are like, I never thought that this kink world would appeal to me, but the way that you do it, wow, that resonated. I'm like, yeah, because when I do caregiver stuff, it's positive affirmation and accountability. It's not me taking control over you.
Yes.
The whole point is that you are still your own person. And like the take that I have on, like, if I put someone in a headspace or whatnot, it is a temporary headspace. And when it comes to like a long-term dynamic, if we're talking about executive functioning issues, it's going to be helping you with reinforcement of long-term habits of just getting your brain to a place of, okay, it's time for supper, it's time to drink water, time to take prescribed meds, not you need to ask my permission to do this stuff. I am not taking over your stuff. It's literally I'm a support, and you're actually going to go to therapy or wherever else. I am not going to fix this for you.
Yeah, so hindsight is 2020, and now I know that that is what I need, and that's what I look for. I look for that sort of daddy dom kind of a person. But back then I didn't know, and found out in the worst way. But yeah, doms are always seen as controlling or abusive or narcissistic. And I mean, don't get me wrong, the dom in question certainly had a lot of those traits, but also helped me thrive, helped me grow, took care of me. And, you know, it's just that we didn't get the balance right. I was too young. He was probably more messed up than I was. It was, you know, but I think for me, the 24/7 is something that I enjoy. Like, I am an intense person and I need that intensity, right? But it's finding that dynamic and being able to keep my autonomy, not having them make decisions about my work life. That's completely separate. Right. And even like my social life, like I get to say if I want to go out with my friends or not. So it's finding that balance. It seems it's so like it's so tempting to have somebody make all the decisions until somebody is making all of the decisions all of the time and you don't know how to do it anymore.
And I think, that's kind of like the big concern. And maybe I think the kink community is shifting. And I think the sex worker community is shifting as well. So many of my accountant friends are in psychology. They are working with sex trafficking victims. They're working in mental health clinics as well and doing the spicy content because they want to and they love it and they enjoy it. And I'm finding that a lot of like the kink community, the sex worker community, they're becoming some of the most psychological and mental health aware people, trauma informed people out there. And so maybe with 24/7 stuff, that is shifting away. Like, I don't know if you ever came across the story of O.
I have that. I've not read it yet, but I have it.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yesterday, I was kind of just doing a little bit of research into 24/7 stuff, and I came across the story of O. And the film and all that. I'm watching this through and I'm going, this is really psychologically unhealthy. Like this does not actually seem like, oh man, there were so many things about it where I was like, I don't think she actually does have that much consent here. This does not actually seem like her life is being improved in any way.
Yeah, well, that's what happened to me. Like, I didn't, and it's not that I did, like, when it came to anything physical or sexual or anything like that, like, he would never have hurt me, but I didn't know how to make a decision anymore because that was their job. And that the pressure on them, like, I remember him losing it with me one time, like, just you decide. And I'm like, that's not my job. I gave that to you. But also, like, I don't know how to do that anymore. Like, it was a really, I have a lot of good memories, but I also have a lot of bad memories. But it was definitely a learning experience for me. But it went on for 9 years. It's a long time.
Right. And I know, like, especially through kinktok as well, I come across a lot of people who are age regressors, they're littles, things like that, where there's trauma involved and they're with a caregiver, like 24/7 caregiver. And that's not necessarily like kink or sexual, especially for the age regressors. There's usually not like the actual sexual component. Because like realistically 24/7 is going to be a thing for somebody somewhere. And that's not something we could ever say, like, don't ever get into this, be aware, like this might have this impact on your brain, blah, 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 this is too dangerous, etc. I think maybe realistically, especially like listening in with your story and right at the very beginning, like you were talking about how you don't really know until you're in it what works for you.
Yeah.
And that kind of reminded me of, what's the one psychologist, Jean Piaget? Like
Piaget.
Yeah, he worked with kids, child development, and talked about how kids are little scientists, and you test your environment and you learn by interacting. And I think maybe
testing the boundaries.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that's maybe something very important to take into kink stuff. And like, you don't have to dive right into a heavy impact scene right off the top, and or 24/7 headspace. Like it's something you can learn over time by testing your environment.
That's one of the reasons why I started talking on kinktok, was I could see all these people who were new or had discovered kink through TikTok, and they're just so eager, and I want people to listen to my mistakes. And I think most of the kinktokers are the same. It's like, don't do what I did. Don't make the same mistakes that I made. Like, the red flags were there. I just didn't, like limits and things. Like, I have limits now that I have because of previous relationships, and because I'm like, and I'm a big believer in try everything, and if you don't want to do it again, that's absolutely fine. But every relationship or dynamic that I've had has been slightly different, just because we're different people. It might go in a different way. That other person might be into something that someone else wasn't, and I think you do find who you are through relationships. But the greatest relationship, I hate to sound like a Hallmark card, but the greatest relationship you'll ever have is with yourself. And I do believe that genuine kinksters are very introspective, because you need to know your limits and you need to know your boundaries, particularly if you're going to be vulnerable and put yourself in someone else's hand, or you're going to take responsibility for someone else. Like, you really need to know that stuff. And sometimes the only way is by trying before you buy.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we run across a lot of like younger people who were vulnerable and ended up in things like 24/7 and all of that. But yeah, a lot of us who are kind of like past that initial relationship, like I know for me, being married was its own type of 24/7 headspace, because the context of that marriage was I got married right back into the religion that I grew up in. And they definitely wanted that. They had that expectation of, you're going to change. If we get you pregnant, basically, we'll just coerce you back to church. And it's going to be a 24/7 dynamic. I don't think a lot of people realize that, is that kink is that headspace. 24/7 headspace doesn't just look like a kink dom sub relationship.
Yeah, I definitely. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what a 24/7. You can have a 24/7 dynamic that isn't a total power exchange. You can just, you can just be two people having a relationship, and like once a week you go into scenes with that role, or you can always have that role but have your own limits and boundaries. Or like any relationship, if you're in a relationship, whether it's monogamous or polyamorous, there's always going to be that 24/7 element to it. So, but keeping up a role of being the dominant or being the submissive 24/7, it's exhausting. So I think you need to be able to step out of that at times and just be in a relationship. That's my opinion.
Yeah, it's a very valid one. And also, I think like going further on, diving into like being introspective and knowing yourself and all that, a big part of our viewers, like listeners, my platform, is those coming from a place of religious trauma. And I know a few other of my kinktok mutuals go on about like, oh my gosh, kink is not just for people who have trauma. But something else, like when we first started interacting, a humorous part of your platform is talking about the priest kink. Yeah. And I did not really get this one until I came across a very specific TikTok account with Father Lee.
Oh yeah.
I think it is. And like this guy in a priest outfit. And he specifically, this feels very targeting witchy people. I mean, just like when you're like getting your tarot read by the witchy MILF or something like that.
Yeah.
And I was like,
I get tagged in his videos every day.
Oh my God. Yeah. And I was like, oh, that's what primal meant. Oh, okay. Like, what's that like new achievement unlocked, new kink unlocked?
New kink. Yeah. Yeah, I have a massive priest kink and a Jesus kink. Yeah, I have religious kink in general.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So,
and I don't have religious trauma either. I'd quite like some. No, I'm joking.
I just need a little bit.
Yeah,
Forgive
just
me,
a
Father.
little bit. But I have sinned. Yeah.
Forgive me, Father. I would like to sin.
I would like to sin in the confessional with you. Yes. What was it you said? You said something, and it was in one of your posts. It was just after the OnlyFans debacle, and you said something about getting railed in the clergy room.
Oh yes,
like, that's my fantasy.
Oh my gosh, no. You see, I definitely being in like a private Christian dorm through university, I lived for those like prayer room moments. I think the first time I ever did like anything like oral related was in the back of a pastor's car. Not
Nice.
When I was related to. We had borrowed one of my ex's we had so many pastors in between us all, but like back when we were dating, you borrowed a family member, one of his family members' cars, and we went in to file the pastor's vehicle. That's fantastic.
Nice. See,
yes.
I would love to do that.
Oh yeah, it's good memories. And I mean, the prayer room was the only place on campus that didn't have cameras, so where else were you going to get it on without getting in trouble?
Well, so because I knew that this was going to come up, and also because I talk about this priest kink, and I had this priest kink long before Fleabag was a thing, and the Jesus kink and everything. So I've really been thinking about where it comes from, and it's kind of messed up, really. But like, church was my safety as a kid. Like, so my parents. I love my parents, but they had no business having children together. I have daddy issues for days, and the priest, our local, we called him a vicar because I went to a Church of England primary school, and the school was next to the church, so it was a church school, and he was just the kindest man. He was so sweet. He knew everything, or I felt like he knew everything. And as an adult, I now know that I'm attracted to intelligence. He made Jesus sound like a superhero. Like, honestly, Jesus was my superhero as a kid. I used to say that, like, Jesus is my superhero because he could do all these things, and he was so kind. And like, we used to have the school rules on the board. Like, I remember them all, you know, and it was about being kind and all of this kind of stuff. And then when I was 9, I got sent to boarding school, and it was an Anglican Catholic boarding school. It was really old school, like a lot of it was in Latin. But my mum said to me, like, if you're ever homesick, and I partly got sent to boarding school because I was rebellious, but if you're ever homesick, if you're ever lonely, if you're ever lost, like, go and find the priest and speak to him. And I did all of the time.
Yeah, I can see how this would set up that headspace.
He cared about me, and he cared about, like, at the time I used to battle my dad all the time. Me and my dad do not get along. Like, I have respect for him as a businessman, but like, he was not a great dad. But I had this priest who fulfilled that role, and that's a bit messed up. And so now, forgive me, Father, for I have sinned. Can I call you Daddy?
Can I call you Daddy? Yes, exactly. Well, I mean, for a lot of people, I know even for myself, like, being in like sub headspace, everything falls away. It's that safe zone where all of your focus is here. The stress of life doesn't matter. I think that's why a lot of people, like, I even had somebody message me and be like, because they're having a tough time, and they were like, is it terrible that I just want to go into puppy space 24/7? Like, I don't want a life anymore. This is a lot. And especially because you have the reinforcement too of like, you submit to God, and obedience to God equals care from God.
God is the ultimate master.
Yeah, it's a 24/7, and that's what actually, it makes me laugh all the time, because the language that is used in church is
on your knees.
Kinky.
It's so kinky.
It's beyond kinky.
I go to church just for the kink now.
Honestly.
Seriously. Yes.
Right? Like, yeah, individual DOMs might not be kink dispensers, but a church service sure is.
Priests are. If you're single and you're a sub and you need just that little kick, go to church, particularly a Catholic one. You know,
Yeah, you'll get just like that little dose, especially if like they're doing the whole like mass thing where like they're feeding you the body of Christ
Yep,
and you're
open
like,
your mouth, and you have to open your mouth, and they put it on your tongue.
mm-hmm. Oh
Yep, and
yeah.
they bless you, my child. Or then you go and tell them how naughty you are, and they tell you that they're naughty, and they make you Hail Mary and Our Father. I'm like, give me more Our Fathers, please.
Yes, yes, please. I mean, they're always saying like Jesus' love is deep and wide, and we're like, yes, Daddy.
Yes, Daddy.
But yes, it was kind of like astonishing to me. And one of the reasons actually I remember as a child, I tried so hard to connect with the concept of Jesus, and I couldn't do it because it always felt so sexual.
Jesus is a bottom.
Honestly, I remember like all of this stuff, like it would be in the music, it would be in the sermons, like the way that they talked about it was as if you were in a romantic sexual relationship with this deity.
Yeah, exactly. Well, this is the thing. So in the church, they make it like Jesus is a top and you have to worship him. But actually, he was a bit of a masochist, let's be honest.
Oh, a little
and
bit.
like the religious imagery that I love is like Jesus on his knees being flogged. His hands are tied. Come on!
I know. It's all right there. Like Jesus submitted himself to punishment. Yeah. And we're all just like,
and just all of it as well, like, you know, the body of Christ, the blood of Christ, like, you know, if you've got a blood kink, that's kind of cool. Like there's so much kink in religion. There really is. Like get on your knees and pray. Submit to the Lord. Like I will.
Yes, I'm submitting myself to you, oh Daddy. And I think that's why like so many, it's now become a trope for all of these girls to be like, yeah, I went to a Christian boarding school. I went to a Catholic school. Look at me now.
Do you know how many kids who went to religious schools are interested in kink? Like the correlation is huge. It's significant.
I mean, like that is, I would love to see some actual research studies being done on this. Yeah. I don't think the religious leaders would be very happy about that result.
Maybe we should do it. Let's just do our own research. Because honestly, particularly the females, but I know some males as well, they're pagan and they're into kink.
Yes.
That's it.
Yes. Honestly, it's become such a thing where
it's normal now.
It is becoming fairly normal. So also while I have you here, because we've been talking about like different types of kinks and all of that, your experience through social media, like taking it from social media, like kind of like living the lifestyle in person, but also interacting with people, like you got hit with some serious post bans there. Cause I know some people were just like not about the discussion whatsoever.
Yeah. So I mean, a year ago, so I've just been asked to advertise something called the Love Hammer. They've gifted it me, and I'm going to do a really funny post about that.
Okay, wonderful.
It will be worth the ban. But a year ago today, did I think that I would be, you know, talking about sex toys on the internet? No, I did not. I did not at all. But I mean, I'm quite honest and open in my real life. But yeah, people do not want us to talk about kink. They just don't. They'll do anything to silence us, and I'm just constantly getting banned now.
I know it's a little ridiculous. I'm trying to remember exactly what that one was you really got hit hard with. I know most recently I saw you put a call out just for people to talk about power exchange outside of kink. Like what do you like talking about how in the UK there were policemen caught for assault? And and women being like, well, what are we supposed to do? Like the police are supposed to keep us safe, and they're the ones using their position of power to target.
Yeah, so basically 7 months ago, a young woman went missing, and she was walking home from her friend's house. She was like an adult. She was 20s, 30s. And a few days later, her body was found, and she'd obviously been, you know, assaulted and murdered. And really quickly, they found out that it was a police officer that had done it.
Right.
And he had actually used his power as a police officer. He had shown her his police badge and told her that she was under arrest. So of course she submitted. She went along with it. He handcuffed her and he took her and he did what he did. But what has happened in the UK is that the women in the UK are like, what do we do then? What do we do if and the government is just not giving us an adequate answer? There's also now, it's unearthed all of this other stuff about other police officers, but a couple of government ministers were like, well, you shouldn't, allow yourself to be arrested. Well, resisting arrest is a crime.
Right. Okay. Not helping. Yeah.
Or flag down a bus.
A bus?
A bus. Now, first of all, buses will only stop at bus stops. Second of all, if you're nowhere near a bus stop or a bus, like I grew up in the countryside,
oh my God,
there's no buses. And thirdly, it's not the bus driver's job to protect women from the police.
No, it's
this
not.
This was the government that said that.
Okay, so, and honestly, like as the bus driver, you're going to assume the policeman knows what they're doing, and the person trying to flag you down is trying to resist arrest, and you go on with your day.
Well, so if a police officer stopped me and showed me his badge and said that I was under arrest, although I'd be questioning what I was under arrest for, you're going to do what the police tell you to do. Honestly. Because you're conditioned that way. So it's caused this big controversy, and so basically I put this out and was talking about it and how ridiculous it is, and lots of women started to say how things have happened to them, and then I started to think, what I knew women who are school teachers for like teenagers in all boys schools, and they've told me how there's been times when they've been intimidated by the male teenagers. So I started to think like, okay, so we have a male person in a position of power abusing that position of trust and power.
Right.
What if we have a female in a position of trust and power? But are they still using and abusing that position of trust and power, or do they feel intimidated in that role? And the reality is they feel intimidated. And, it's not all men. It's not all men. I have so many amazing men in my life, but to some women, they will be intimidating just because they're a man.
That is very true. I learned the hard way. Like a lot of the people in my life who were the ones that needed to be watched out for were the men that I was told were safe. Yeah. And what we know now, especially when it comes to as being a spicy content creator, what I'm up against is the bias of like these advocacy places, these fundamentalist Christian organizations who are speaking for sex trafficking victims, lumping sex workers with trafficked victims. And we're out here like, well, you're speaking for us. This isn't actually right. But when it comes to things like sex trafficking, we're like, look, if you really want to tackle sex trafficking, look at your pulpit.
Yeah, absolutely. They use that position of trust and power. Like, so I'm really lucky with my priest kink. Like the clergymen that I trusted were trustworthy, and that's why I love them so much. But that love has changed as I got older, because I need that daddy dom to take care of me, and that's what they did in a way. But that position of power can get abused. It's so easy, and once they do it once, that's it.
Yes, and that was actually another. There's so many big discussions now that happened, like just ripped through social media, and one of the most recent being, can safe words be abused? And I know that one really set people off.
I know the person who originally posted, and her post was about, because there's the focus on TikTok is about toxic dominance, when actually I see more toxic subs in the comment section. And whilst toxic doms they can be predatory and they can be dangerous, toxic subs don't get the same uproar. Like a dom will always get called abusive, a sub doesn't, but subs can be incredibly manipulative as well. And so this one person was talking about how their sub had safe worded constantly just to get out of a punishment.
Right.
And so obviously in that situation, they need to renegotiate their terms and their punishments, because if they're constantly safe wording to get out of something, they're manipulating the situation. But that then became a whole other discussion about, can safe words be abused? And yeah, like, absolutely, it doesn't matter whether someone safe words once or 100 times, that safe word should always be upheld. Like, consent is everything.
Well, because I never weighed in on this publicly.
Yeah, I didn't either.
Yeah, it was something that, especially because people are having such strong reactions to it. But from my experience with actual predatory and abusive people, I was listening to these people who are going like, safe words can't be abused. And my take on that was, you've created a blind spot. Because if I wanted, as a dom, to abuse and manipulate you, your safe word's now where I'm going to go, because you have publicly made it clear that you don't think that can be abused.
Yeah.
And yeah, the concept.
Anything can be abused. If you're a human being, you can abuse anything.
1000%. I mean, like, if you're in a position of power and authority, usually what we see with predatory people is that they operate in positions of authority where we think that they wouldn't be the person to do that. You got caregivers working with kids because they prey on children, and you're literally handing off your child to somebody who's in a position of authority that you trust.
Well, if you're attracted to children, what are you going to do? You're going to want to be near children.
Yeah, you're going to want to work with children. Like, there was that one guy where they asked him in an interview, how many kids have you molested? And he looks outside where it's snowing. He's like, how many snowflakes are on the ground out there?
Yeah. Well, that's a big thing in the UK at the moment. There's a lot of teachers who are getting prosecuted. But no, anything can be abused. If you're an abusive person, you'll find a way to. And this is the problem with TikTok. The semantics are misconstrued. A safe word should never be abused, but a safe word can be abused. And that's what people were missing. That's what people were missing. And, you know, at the end of the day, safe word is your consent and taking it back. But yeah, people were focusing on the wrong thing. And that's why it went on for so long, because people's feelings were getting hurt.
Yeah, I remember sitting back on that conversation and thinking, it's not safe words can be abused, it's abusive people can use safe words.
Yeah.
Like, we always forget to keep the focus on the abusive person themselves, not the tools that they're using.
Yeah, because a safe word's just a word. It's just a word in the atmosphere. It's how it's used and that potentially abused that is the problem. It's not the word itself. Or consent. Consent is not the problem. It's the person abusing it. So it absolutely can be abused, but it absolutely should not be abused. And it can be abused both ways. It can be abused both ways. You know, so yeah, that's my take on that conversation.
Oh, honestly, like, I was sitting back and I was like, well, let's say you as let's say either one safe worded and the other person kept going. They've just abused the safe word. And I was like, y'all are only looking at it from one context. What about if I, as the top, say, before the scene, I've put so much work and effort into putting the scene together for us. I would be so sad and disappointed if something happened and we couldn't finish the scene. Like, I put so much work into this, like that pre-guilt, so that you're less likely to use your safe word, or afterwards, if let's say I, as a submissive, safe word out of something, the scene ends, and then instead of communicating what happened, I go, well, maybe if you were a better dom, I wouldn't have to safe word.
Yeah, and also I think the thing with TikTok as well, or certainly the safe word conversation that happened, a lot of people who have trauma were pulled into that conversation, and they've had it happen to them where they safe worded and it wasn't adhered to, and so they were coming from a very personal place instead of trying to, and this is the problem. Like, with me, I talk about personal experiences, but I always try to look at all the angles, because because I'm trying to educate. Like, I never went in there to be an educator, but that's the way people see me, and I try my best to do that well. And the only way you can do that is by sort of talking through all of the angles.
Absolutely.
But then you have people who are just talking about their experience, and they're very emotionally invested in that, as they, you know, should be. But they can't necessarily see the other side because they're stuck in that trauma response. So.
Yeah, that was definitely something I noticed with the safe word debate, is people were not
like it was such a singular focus on don't say that safe words can't be abused, because then you're going to have these submissives who already have trouble with boundaries feeling worried that, oh, I can't safe word, maybe I'm abusive if I safe word. And I'm like, you've got bigger issues to look at here with that specific situation. That's a blind spot now.
Yeah, one of the things that I want to do, and I've been saying it for a while, but I think just confidence for submissives. There are so many submissives who are like, but if I safe word, I'm letting my dom down. Let me tell you, in my last dynamic, my dom safe worded more than I did because it was too much for them. And, you know, that was absolutely, and also there were times where maybe I was in subspace, so I wouldn't have been able to safe word, and he didn't feel comfortable in continuing the scene. Like, but when I have safe worded, I've always been like praised, because it's like, thank you for trusting me enough to let me know that, you know. And now I say, like, the first couple of times I'm with someone, I safe word on purpose just to see what will happen. Like, it's almost
a little bit of testing.
It's a bit of a test, because I want to know and I want to see their reaction. Like, obviously I want them to stop, because that's just the bare minimum. But I want to see how they react to me being vulnerable enough, because it is a vulnerable, you know, getting to your safe word, you're in a place of vulnerability where you need to stop. Like, I want to see how they react to that. And my experiences have always been, apart from one time, which it wasn't kink, it was assault, but their reactions have always been really good. And I just think a lot of new submissives, they really need that confidence. They really, like, they need to know that they can have their autonomy, and they can safe word, they can withdraw consent whenever they need to.
Absolutely. I know for myself, the DOMs that are problematic, the ones to watch for, will be the ones that say things like, you're not a real submissive, or things like that, right? Where it's, they undermine your confidence in yourself. They'll, like, if somebody is making you feel that they're disappointed in you for safe wording, that is definitely a no. Because that's
a huge red flag. Yeah, huge.
Definitely.
And people don't understand coercion. You know, they
don't.
No, they do not get it, because someone who is guilty of coercive behavior is usually very manipulative, usually very clever, usually has some kind of excuse or out. You know, it's usually not their first time, and they're really good at gaslighting.
Absolutely. I mean, personally, it wasn't actually something I really understood until it was within the context of that private Christian university I attended, where they were really emphasizing behavior modification. And they're teaching us about positive versus aversive stimulus. And then as I continued on with my education, I was looking back and I was like, you're teaching your theology students how to coerce their church congregation, their audience, through their sermon with like these tactics of emotional positive and aversive stimulus. And then you can take that also and apply it to, like, in the kink world, where you look at somebody where, like, a submissive, like you said, a submissive can also be a very toxic person. And this is something we need to be realistic about. That whole, like, don't ever say that, or the submissives who don't have confidence will worry that it's them. No, that also, like, we need to have some accountability for those who
are everybody.
It could be anybody. And that is that Chris Wilson, I think, is who it was, like an interfaith clergy, brought it up within that safe words debate, the very important point that anybody can be abusive, and we cannot give subs this free pass of, oh, they're just so cute and small and subby and little. No. No, there are some submissives out there who use guilt and manipulation tactics to use their dom as a kink dispenser. That is something that happens.
I see that. Like, I have to stay out of male dom creators' comment section because it drives me insane.
Same.
Because they are treated like kink dispensers. I have a few male dominant friends who are just reaching their limit, because they are, I mean, it's kind of interesting, because kinktok is the one place where male creators do exceptionally well, but also the tables are turned and they are completely objectified in the way that women have been experiencing for years. But
it's kind of amusing in that way.
Yeah, so it is kind of amusing because on the one hand, you know, when someone is talking about how this male dominant is being used and objectified, I'm like, welcome to female world.
Like, hello.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, so we didn't make this first, but at the same time, as a woman, I don't like it because I've experienced it so much in my life that I then feel super protective.
A little bit. I've noticed that too, where I'm also somewhat like, this is not okay.
Yeah.
Just no, and then
leave him alone.
Yes.
He's not, yeah, exactly. Like, you know, his growling is not just, you know, that's not all he does, or, you know,
he's not
let
just
him
a
keep
growl.
his shirt on. Yeah, he's more than just a growler. He's smart. Like, you know, he's not just here for your entertainment, but then is he just there for your entertainment? I don't know. Like, they put themselves out there, but at the same time, they deserve respect. But yeah, I do feel like a lot of the male dominants have become kink dispensers, and it's a very interesting turn of the tables, because for years women have been objectified and women have been there for male pleasure, you know, like strippers and all that kind of stuff. But on kinktok, it's the other way around. The men are dispensing the, you know, the happy times for the women, but the way the women behave is really disrespectful. Like, I know that if there was a group of men talking in the comment section about me the way that some of these women talk about the male creators, there would be uproar. Like, the hell would be released, because nobody would put up with that. But not many people take the women to task and say, like, actually, that's really toxic behavior that you're displaying in the comment section.
Yeah. Well, and I found that, like, there's the fantasy. There is a little bit of a fantasy of, like, this strong caregiver dom male who steps into your life and fixes it, who provides the stress. All of that stress is just gone, and you are now economically stable. You are now in a place where all your needs being cared for. You're having a rockin' sex life. It's like this whole
Disney
fantasy,
kink.
right? Yeah.
I call kinktok Disneyland kink.
Yeah, and that I can definitely see where you're coming from with that perspective. And also, I think, like, leading into the last area that I wanted to talk with you about was, you really got taken to task by, like, a lot of people over responding to a comment on TikTok.
Which one?
Yeah, right. But it was like, and this one I wanted to talk about, because this actually resulted in you being like, okay, like, here's how we address this in a very constructive way. And it took you to a very interesting place. And I found personally, I don't think it's a very realistic take on interacting with minors on TikTok, especially in regards to kink. Like, I remember when I first started interacting with kinktok, the big thing was, if you're a minor, don't interact with my page. If you're a minor, I'm going to block you. I go through, like, my following and I block the minors. And I'm like, you have over 400,000 followers and your notifications do not show you everyone who follows or comments or likes. It doesn't. It shows you less than a third of your interaction on your page once you hit a certain level. And so all these people are like, yeah, I block all the minors. And I'm here like, when would you have the time?
I don't believe anyone who says that. They try to. I believe that they try to.
Yeah.
But you can't possibly, because also it's so easy to create a profile.
Also, you don't know who is and is not a minor. User 2137894
with no content.
With
you
no
don't
content.
know who they are. Plus, I know that people want people to put their age in their bios. I don't want minors to put their age in their bios, because that makes them more of a target for people who want minors for, you know, nefarious reasons. That conversation. My original conversation opener, because one of my followers, who is recently of age but has been in kink for a long time kind of said, like, I've been in this for a long time and it wasn't safe. How do we make it safer? And I was like, I don't know, I'll ask the audience. So I said, like, okay, there are minors already doing this. How do we keep them safe if they're not allowed to access our content or they're not allowed to be part of our community? And that then got turned into, should minors be in kink? No, they shouldn't. But what do we do about the ones who are already here?
Yes.
And then it became this whole other thing of, they're watching our content. And then I see it in a lot of the Discord servers, a lot of the kinktokkers, they get really angry with the minors watching their content. And it's like, you know, there are kids on this app, so why are you getting angry with them when you're the adult? You're saying kids shouldn't be in kink and kids shouldn't be doing this, but then you're getting angry when you're doing the kink stuff next to their playground, and actually you're the fault. But then I felt like a hypocrite because I'm doing it too, and it's like, well, I don't know the answer, and I wish I'd never started this conversation. But
that was I remember watching that blow up and a lot of people being like very, very intense about it. However, the way that you did deal with it was very publicly. Everyone saw the interaction. It wasn't something went down in like DMs or anything like that. It was like, here's
when I actually responded to the minor.
Yeah, when you actually responded to them. And I think that is also something that people don't really realize with TikTok, is that it doesn't matter if you make a video being like, minors don't interact with my content. That vid is gone within a week.
Yeah, and they've already watched it, because the minute you tell a child not to do something, they're going to do it. Those like 18 over buttons would have enticed me. They don't, like, as a 14-year-old, if I saw 18 plus on something, but I can access it, hey, guess what? I'm going to watch that video.
Yeah, 1000%. So, okay, this, because I remember like we were talking from there, and I remember Sunny Megatron weighed in and then brought up that when minors ask about things, here are the resources you can direct them to that are age appropriate for them. And instead of being like, no, never ever talk to me, don't interact with me, I do kink content, I can't talk to you, instead being like, oh, hey, there's these resources over here that are appropriate for you, that are safe, they're informed, they're based in research.
Well, Sunny Megatron was the only person who understood the assignment and gave me the answer that I needed, which was like, because, you know, she also acknowledges she's not stupid enough to say they're never going to watch our content, or, and I don't feel comfortable treating teenagers as less than just because their age is different. They're still a human being, and I would rather that I don't necessarily want to talk to them one-on-one, but if they're doing something and they're unsafe, they should be given the safe information. Like, they don't get to 18 and it's like, now we're allowed to teach you how to be safe, but they've been doing it, for a long time. So Sunny had these resources that I didn't have, and she came along and said, okay, like, don't interact with them, but if they come to you, this is where you send them. And she gave me the websites, Scarlet Teen and Bish UK, which are great resources. So that was all I wanted, was like, how do I deal with this? Because they're here, they're asking questions, they're watching. You can't pretend that they're not watching. The smart ones won't make themselves known, but they'll be watching,
Yeah, exactly. And I think, like, well, you and I both have that base. Like, my part of my university degree is literally working with at-risk youth.
Yeah.
And that becomes the hard part for a lot of us, is that, like, our background, we've taken the classes in cognitive childhood development. We know that when teenagers, like minors, interact with our content, we're doing what they're just doing what their brain is designed to do at that age, to take in information, to interact, to learn, especially from people who are older. And so when we see adults on TikTok getting angry with minors for doing what their brain is designed to do, it can become very frustrating.
It's also like, do you not remember being a teenager? Like, do you not remember what that was like? And I just think it's very naive, and I think it's not just naive, but irresponsible to suggest that, one, they're not going to watch your content, or two, that it's down to their parents. Like, not everyone has, like, I don't know many adults in the kink world who would go to their parents as adults and talk about kink. Like, why would you expect a teenager to do that? There's nothing more embarrassing in
No, I did not want to talk to my parents.
Like, come on, what kid is going to do that? And then you've got the kinktokkers who are parents who are like, well, I would want my child, of course you would want your child to talk to you, that doesn't mean they're going to. And that's no reflection on your parenting whatsoever. It's icky.
It's icky. No one wants to talk to their
icky.
parents about sex.
Yeah, and particularly sex, like kink sex. And the problem is, you've got things like 50 Shades of Grey that catapulted kink into the mainstream. Like, any kid can watch that on Netflix. Like, it's so easy to
Right,
access
bonding
now.
is the bonding show. It's
Bonding.
right there.
Yeah, it's right there. Like, if you have Netflix and you don't have those kids controls, your 11, 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old can watch 50 Shades of Grey, bonding. If you've left them alone with an iPhone and they have TikTok, they can be watching my content. So I try now to be mindful of the fact that whilst I don't welcome them, like I make it clear I don't want them watching, I know they're there. They're there. Even if they don't follow me, they could watch my content. So I try. And then I went and did, and I'm just about to finish, an actual sex and relationships educator course so that I can actually educate on it. Yeah. Right. So yeah, at least I have some knowledge. Yeah.
Well, for sure. To be honest, like watching all of that go down, I really liked that the outcome was not shut minors down. It was not keep them away as much as possible. It was when they ask questions, here's where to direct them that is safe, that doesn't put them in a vacuum with the predatory people where the only adults interacting with them are the ones that should not be. But it also is just like, here is the place where all of the scientific research has been compiled in a way that like your brain can understand, that is appropriate for your age. Because like no one wants to go to their mom and be like, Mom, I have fantasies about our local priest bending me over the pew and paddling me. Like no one wants to have that conversation with mom. No. No. So but it is something that's important because the psychological side of kink is important. And I think even for minors to be like, I remember being in church at times and being like, this song, the wording of this is making me feel a very certain type of way, and I'm very confused right now, and not having any answers for that. And
yeah,
I think for a lot of us who are trying to be responsible, who are trying to create that safe environment where minors can find those resources, I think that's very vital and important to be like, no, we're not shutting you out, we're not shutting you down for our own safety. You're at arm's length, but here's where you go.
That's what's sad about this world is that we as adults have to protect ourselves from these scary children, because unfortunately there are some adults that are not nice, and and it really is sad that as adults we have to protect ourselves. And the thing that upset me about that conversation as it was going on is I became more and more aware of just how many minors were watching kinktok as a collective, and all they were hearing until we got these resources were like, minors are scary, minors are less than, they need to speak to their parents, which if you have shitty parents, even if you have decent parents, you're not going to talk to them about kink. Minors shouldn't be treated the same, and it really upset me that what they were getting was that they're not they're human beings. Like, I want to treat them as human beings. I don't care if they're 3 months old, 13 or 30. You're a human being, and if you're asking for help, you should be given help, which was why I responded to that question, because that question that girl asked was really triggering. Like, she'd already been asking lots of questions. It was very clear that she was engaging in kink already, and she was potentially not safe. I don't want to go to bed and have to worry about the fact that I've ignored that human being.
Yeah.
So I took some heat for that, but
Well, I think there was definitely a very positive outcome from that, because interacting online with the kink community, like, the minors are the elephant in the room when it comes to social media and kink. And I mean, for myself, the kink community, I think it's vital. As somebody with religious trauma who was in some very abusive power exchange stuff prior and whatnot, the kink community is the one that had all the information about consent. What I didn't know about the Fries model or anything like that until I started interacting with the kink community. I very much believe the kink community is a vital part of safety and consent and risk awareness, even for the vanilla people as well.
Yeah.
And when it comes to all of that, that is still very important. And I think when we talk about psychology, the psychology of kink, like, we're not talking just about like oh, I wonder why like being paddled is so satisfying for me or anything like that. I think there's also everything's interconnected, and
Yeah.
it's important to talk about all this because your formative years play a huge part in that. Like you're talking about your priest kink relating back to this safe zone
Yeah, when I
that
was a child.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like it's not as if you hit a certain adult age and all of a sudden you're kinky.
No.
It's a brain developing from childhood onward throughout
Absolutely.
into adulthood. And
Everybody has kinks. Vanilla is a kink. Everything can be a kink if you fetishize it. And there's a difference between having kinks, being into stuff, and being within the kink community. It's just that the people that are in the kink community are self-aware enough to, you know, do their research and get involved and sort of know who they are. Most of the kink community are the most self-aware, introspective people that you'll ever meet, because you have to do that work on yourself. I mean, honestly, you should do that work on yourself before you ever get into a partnership, whether it's a kink relationship or anything else, you know.
Absolutely. 1000% agreed. And I think like one last thing I want to like ask from your perspective, of course, is like we've been talking about things like unhealthy dynamics, manipulation, coercion, knowing yourself, and all of that. And of course, like for my platform, we talk about shadow work a lot, which is also just that introspection. Yeah, exactly. And so when it comes to kink and psychology and all of this stuff, for people who wanting to start, like who are just like, you know what, you're right, I want to test things, I want to start doing that process. What would you say would be kind of like some great tools or resources, or just like a great place to start with that introspection and be like, okay, we're confronting internal biases, we're examining things internally, like a great place to begin that process?
There's lots of resources out there. There's loads of books, there's loads of websites, there's loads of podcasts. But so if you have a specific kink that you're interested in, you can definitely go and learn. The DES dynamic is a kink within itself. Like, you know, you can be into, a lot of people don't understand, you don't have to be in a dom sub relationship to be interested in kink or BDSM. But honestly, I think if you are going to go into kink, really you should just sit and, I mean, it would help to write it down, but like, who are you? What do you like? What do you not like? Even if you don't know what your limits are, you'll know, like, I don't want to do that, or I want to try that. I think that's the basics of what you need is, you know, like, what is it you're looking for? And if you don't know what that is, what is it you definitely don't want? Because sometimes figuring out what you want comes from knowing what you don't want. And then going from there, like, so if you've decided that you want to be dominant or you want to be submissive or you're into paddling, then go and find the right resources. A kinktok is a great way, it's a great introduction. It's Disney kink, so it's a really good way. It's a soft
intro there.
Very, very, very soft. But then, you know, there's the first book I ever had was Screw the Roses, Send Me the Thorns. It's a brilliant book. Then you've got like I think it's called BDSM 101. There's lots of books, resources. You could then get onto FetLife and start to look into your community. But yeah, definitely research and then become a part of your community, and don't go into a frenzy. Don't like start playing straight away. Don't go looking for a dom or looking for a sub straight away. Like, go to munches. So munches are social interactions where there's no actual kink going on. It's just a bunch of kinky people having a chat, having some drinks or some food or whatever, and it's a really good way to get that safety net.
Yes, absolutely. Because you see, like, community is a huge part of like kink, because if you are going to the munches and stuff like that, or interacting with other content creators and things like that, they'll be able to tell you who the missing stairs are.
Yeah.
Because if you come into like the kink scene being like, you know what, I saw Rosie online as a caregiver dom, I really vibe with that caregiver dom stuff. I've kind of like, I'm in this place where I don't feel so great, I'm emotionally drained, all this stuff, I need a caregiver. And then you just land in with a caregiver dom, without checking with the community, without asking about their credentials beforehand, all of this stuff, you really come at it from a vulnerable place versus if you establish yourself in the community first and you're going like, yeah, I'm very interested in a caregiver dom dynamic. Who are the caregiver doms who are active on this scene, or who's interested in this stuff as well, versus and also who should I be aware of, like who's had bad experiences.
Exactly. So like, I mean, within kinktok, you'd be like, okay, if you wanted a caregiver dom, you should follow Rosie. Or if you want if you're into hypnosis kink, there's a couple of really good people. If you're into rope, there's this person. So you can do that. And then in your local community, if you get involved, if you're lucky enough to be able to get involved in your local scene and you're starting to meet people, if that person isn't a good person, someone will give you a heads up. And that's what the community does. It keeps you safe.
Yeah, that
should do.
Yes, exactly. That's what you want. And I know like one of the biggest questions I see show up for people new to kink is like, what hard limits? I don't know what my hard limits are. And
that's okay.
That is okay. But for context, a hard limit, well, like let's say I'm your dom. I'm just going to shave your eyebrows off. You tell me you don't have limits, like bye-bye eyebrows.
Oh my God. Yeah. Well, I don't have limits. So this is two ways. So on the one hand, like I genuinely don't know what my limits are. That's fine. Communicate that, but not in a, I don't have any limits.
Oh my God.
I don't know what my limits are is what you should say, because I don't have any limits. Can I run you over with my car? Because I've always wanted to see what that feels like. Right. It's okay to be inexperienced and communicate that. And hopefully you're communicating that to somebody who is trustworthy and who isn't going to go in hard in the beginning and is going to be, okay, well, we'll discover this together. And you communicate with me at every opportunity, whether you like this or whether you don't. Like that's the way it should be done. You do it together. You know, I've never done this before. No, neither have I. Okay, we'll figure it out as we go and we'll keep communicating. But just saying, hey, I'm a new sub and I don't have any limits. Red flag.
Oh my God, right? Like, honestly, if you roll up on a kink scene and are telling people around you, yeah, I don't have limits. You can do whatever you want to me. We're all like, that is the weirdest flex of all time. That's literally you being like, I self-harm. That is who I am as a person. My personality is self-harm.
It's one of the worst things as a new sub that you can say, because you will straight away not be taken seriously. And hopefully someone will come to you and say, listen, everyone has limits. Like death is a limit.
Yes, death is a limit, right?
3rd degree burns are a limit. Like honestly, because some people have their limits are up there, so you don't want to be put in those hands because you're going to be scarred for life. So you want to be like, I'm new, I'm not sure what my limits are, can we take this slowly? That's how you do it. Not, I don't have any limits. No, you do. And we'll find them really fast. And then you're going to need therapy, you know?
Yeah, exactly. It's one of those things where you're like, please do not self-traumatize.
Yeah.
That's not sexy. That's not kinky.
Like with every community, it doesn't matter whether it's the kink community or, you know, a cake making community, there are going to be toxic individuals. There are going to be
1000%
individuals. That's human nature. The problem with the kink community is because until recently we've always been in the shadows, and because it's talking about things that people don't necessarily want to be open about, it makes it easier for predators to hide. So someone coming into the community and saying, hey, I don't have any limits, they are fair game for an abusive person.
It's one of those things that's just absolutely wild, where you're like, social media is making new relationships in ways that were not there before.
It's changing dynamics as well, because I think, you know, as the more honest and open we are and the more we communicate these things, the harder it is for the abusive people to hide. You know, like this is what's happened recently with the government and the police. You know, the police once upon a time would have covered that up. There was absolutely no way they could cover that up in this day and age. And because of it, it has now meant that there has been this massive outcry in the UK. Yeah. And so now any police officer who has had any kind of disciplinary go on in their career towards anything like sexual or anything like that, they're now it's all being put out in the open. because unfortunately, when you keep things in the shadows, people will cover up, people will hide it, and they will hide that abusive behavior. But if we're honest and open and there's nothing to hide, like now, I've been kink shamed a lot. Now, if someone tries to kink shame me, I laugh at them because I'm like,
Right?
everybody, my dad knows I have a priest kink. Like, you can't scare me. Like, go pick on someone else.
I know it's so nice to see the stigma changing. It's nice to see that normal, healthy human behavior being recognized as normal and healthy. But I'm seeing that we've come up on a really awesome chunk of time for this interview, and we got in so much great information here. I am so happy you joined me here. Like you're our first interview for this.
Yay!
And yeah,
I've had a great time.
I love that. Where can viewers find your content?
So on TikTok, I'm Primal Empress or the Primal Empress or primal.empress because I have 3 accounts. On Instagram, I am Empress Primal, and I'm also on Patreon, Primal Empress.
Fantastic. Of course, we'll be linking some of that below as well for viewers to access. And also, I guess, last question, where are you hoping to go from here with like the kink education stuff and your training and all of that?
YouTube, I think I'm going to start doing some YouTube stuff and do a lot more educational content on there because I can discuss the nuances a little bit more on there, but also intersperse it with some very basic sex education and consent education. So if there are people who don't know these things, they hopefully will find them. And yeah, just keep doing what I'm doing and see what happens.
Fantastic. Well, all of those, as you keep building that, my Discord has its own like area for kink and all that good stuff. So that will all be linked over there as well as you start building it. I absolutely love and support your platform and what you're doing. I think
and you too. I love your platform. You were one of my first like creators that I followed on TikTok.
Oh, yeah. It's kind of like a mutual creator. Like, hi.
Yeah,
very much so. Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for joining this episode here. Thank you to our viewers. We will be back in a couple weeks with another interview, hopefully talking about goddess worship, talking about spiritual warfare. It's Halloween season, so something to keep an eye out for those who are in deconstruction of faith process. So we'll see you again for that episode. And once again, you can find all my content under Rosie Quartz or Rosie Quartz Official with Patreon, YouTube, Twitch streaming, several TikTok accounts. So thank you once again for joining. And thank you, Primal Empress, for our discussion on psychology and kink.